the Secretary General of the Asean, distinguished ministers, leaders of the industry, other dignitaries on the dais, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed been a privilege for India to host the meeting of the ASEAN trade ministers for the last 2 days in India. This has acquired significance because of a 25-year-old relationship between the ASEAN and India. And of course, a relationship which culminated into a free trade agreement, subsequent to which trade between India and the ASEAN countries itself multiplied. And this meeting is being held on the eve of the leaders' meeting on the 25th of January, 2 days from now, where this relationship will further be consolidated in order to take some giant steps forward for the future. The ASEAN leaders, of course, will be our distinguished guests on the Republic Day itself. The Indian-ASEAN relationship has many facets to it. We are linked to each other by geography in the first instance. ASEAN is of extreme importance to India because Look East has been one of the essential pillars of our foreign policy. Most ASEAN nations and India have a lot of shared values, shared culture. Buddhism brings a religious connection between them and India. And therefore, the ASEAN nations and India are integrally connected to each other. And for the trade ministers of the region, there is indeed a special responsibility. Because this meeting, as Mr. Mittal in his introductory remarks mentioned, is really looking down the tunnel as to how this region would grow and this relationship would grow along the next 25 years. If we look back, this was a region where for most of the countries, growth has conventionally eluded us. When the Western world was growing faster, the Industrial Revolution was bringing dividends to that part of the world. These were countries which were still struggling. Our economic growth and development was somewhat a latter prospect. But in the last few years, this is the region which indeed has grown very fast. I understand that the ASEAN nations' growth rate is anywhere between 4.5% to 5%. In a situation where the world has seen a global slowdown. And the prospect of this region growing in the next 2.5 decades is extremely significant. The Indian story is almost somewhat similar. From a very modest growth rate in the last 25 years, we've picked up and today have reached a point where India becomes one of the faster growing economies in the world. And any region that trades with India, or any person who invests in India, really looks at the prospect over the next 2 to 3 decades of where his investment would stand, which would be directly correlated to where India would be standing. From the 7th largest, moving to the 5th largest economy, unquestionably, the period of 25 years which we've discussed, India would perhaps be one of the 3 largest economies at that time in the world. And India has already demonstrated that it has even a capacity to grow during adversity. A few minutes ago, our Honorable Prime Minister, addressing the World Economic Forum, pointed out that one of the 3 important global challenges is the fact that the world has now increasingly started looking inwards. And that is what the Prime Minister mentioned, where India stands out as an exception. That this confidence of the new India is that it is getting greater, globally integrated. And this opening out in terms of trade, opening out in terms of investment, has certainly brought not only additionality of resources as far as India is concerned, but significantly improved upon India's own competitive strengths. And I can obviously see there have been traditional ASEAN nations. Singapore, for instance, was always conventionally doing very well. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines. These are all nations which are now significantly picking up, significantly opening out to investment. And therefore, India and the ASEAN nation represents an aspirational world. This aspirational world is what houses 2 billion people. And trade has the capacity to give that necessary impetus to the economy. And I'm quite certain that the prospects of further improving upon our trade relationship as the ASEAN and the Indian economies expand. Our mutual experiences have been that more opening out helps more investment. More investment creates more economic activity, it creates more jobs, it creates more prosperity. And having benefited in the last few decades from this experience, it's quite obvious that over the next 2.5 decades, the period that we've discussed, that this very sizable part of the global population, which had conventionally lagged behind, which is today aspirational, and which has demonstrated its capacity to reform, even when the rest of the world was looking inwards, I'm sure will be able to expand its mutual trade. We in India, of course, offer great opportunities in terms of a very large infrastructure investment that we need, because there is an infrastructure deficit that we have in India. We want India's domestic manufacturing to grow. In the services sector, whether it's healthcare or it's education or tourism, we offer a great potential in terms of investment. And our own industry has acquired a confidence that it is looking outwards and investing where the prospects themselves are good. And therefore, ASEAN and India represent the region where mutual investments bring mutual benefits to each other. I'm quite certain that having already tasted the fruits of this success, particularly after our trade, after more liberalization has expanded, the next 2 to 3 decades, the best in this relationship is still going to emerge. We've had an extremely successful meeting over the last 2 days. These are opportunities where policy makers and business leaders interact with each other and therefore provide an opportunity for further economic activity in both the regions. And I'm quite certain that this relationship, in terms of economic investment in the two regions, is going to prosper. I am certain that the foundation which has been laid down in the trade ministers' meeting will certainly reflect itself when our leaders meet for the main conference on the 25th itself. Thank you very much.